So if you're anything like me, you've been playing with ChatGPT pretty obsessively for the last few months. And, that's really cool. But recently I've been diving more into other AI tools and finding out ways that we can combine them into interesting and useful projects. So in this video, I'm going to teach you exactly how to build a tool just like the one on the page here for colorizing and restoring old photos. You don't need to know how to code at all, and you can do all of this very simply with Zapier. So let's get into it. So what I've built here is a restorer and colorizer for vintage photos. Whether that's stuff that you find on the internet, like I did with, this Newsboys photo here, or you could do it with personal family photos, and I did a little bit of that as well. So you upload your photo here to this form, put your email address in, submit, and in a few minutes that's going to send you a fully colorized and modernized version of that photo. We don't have to wait for that. We can look. So this is the original photo that I uploaded, and this is the final colorized photo that we get out. So you can see it's higher resolution and it's colorized, and it looks pretty good, really. This is a famous old photo, but this is one that I did of an old family photo of mine. This is my grandfather here and his older brothers, and you can see it colorized this one quite nicely as well. So how do we do this? You're going to want to go over to Replicate. We're going to use a combination of two tools in Replicate. One is this de-oldify image, and one is GFP GAN. De-oldify image here is really like an image colorizing tool, and this works pretty well by itself, but I found I got slightly better results if I chained it with this GFP GAN tool also, which does a little bit more of restoration for old photos, particularly on faces. And so the first thing to do is set up your form. So I just built this in Tally Forms. I like Tally Forms because it's free and it's relatively flexible, but really you could use any form software that you want. We're going to be using Zapier to chain everything together, and Zapier has integrations for pretty much every major form builder that you have out there. But for the purposes of this, I'm just using Tally Forms, and I have a bunch of stuff in here, but most of this is just text. Really the important fields that you're going to want to add, one is to upload a file. So you can just insert a block and go in here to file upload. That's what you need there. And then this one is an email address where we're going to actually send the results. So that would be this email here. And that's basically it. You can add those, save your form, and then you'll be ready to go. So now let's head over to Zapier where we're going to actually set up all of the logic here. So I have this blank folder here for this project. And this project, because we're using two different AI tools, this is going to actually end up being 3 separate zaps. Normally, you can create projects that have a number of steps in a row. The problem with doing that with these AI tools is that a lot of them take a while to actually generate the image. So, you could be looking at anywhere from like 10 seconds up to a few minutes. And while it's possible to create stuff like that in Zapier by waiting and trying again to kind of retrieve the results, that's not ideal, because if you don't wait long enough, you'll miss the results and it won't be reliable. So what we're going to actually do is create a few separate zaps and use webhooks to transfer the completed images that we get from Replicate into each following zap. And I promise it's not as complicated as it sounds, but let's get started here. And we're going to actually start with the last zap in this process. So this is going to be the zap that retrieves the results from this GFP GAN function in Replicate, and then actually sends the email with the final results. So for that, we're going to be using this webhook here. So click into this. The event is going to be catch hook. And what a webhook is it's really just a way for internet applications to pass data back and forth between each other. And so continue here. You can ignore this pick off child key. We're not going to be using that. And what it's going to do is generate this URL for you. And this URL is what you're going to use to tell the replicate model where to actually send that result once it's complete. That's why we were doing these steps in this order, to make sure that we get this URL first. And if we click test trigger now, nothing's going to happen because we're not yet sending any information to this URL. So we're going to have to set up some more stuff with this first. So now that we have this URL, I'm going to just go back to this main folder in Zapier, and we're going to move to an earlier step of this process. We'll be bouncing back and forth between a few of these, which is just kind of necessary with how you set it up using these webhooks. So let's go ahead now and create our second zap. And I'm just going to go back in here actually. And so by default, these are untitled, but things can get really confusing if you leave them untitled. So I'm just going to call this step 3. Now we can come back into here and we're going to be looking at step 2. So step 2 of this process is we're going to retrieve the results from this first model deoldify image, and we're going to send the results to the next model, which does the upscaling and facial corrections. So again, what we're going to be doing in here is handling webhooks. So similar to the last example, this is going to be retrieving results from the first model run. So what we need to do here is the same thing that we did in the last step. We're going to do catch hook, continue. Again, we can ignore this child key, continue, and again, we get this URL. So we'll be able to use this URL finally to actually start setting up our process with our first zap. So again, I'm just going to pause on this zap for the moment. I'm going to rename it step 2. Okay, so now we have step 3 started, step 2 started, and now we're going to go in here and we're going to create our first zap. So the first zap trigger function is going to be when we actually retrieve a result from that form that we set up. So anytime anybody goes into that form and submits a new photo with their email address, we want to be able to retrieve that and then actually do something with that information. So we set it up with Tally Forms. Like I said, you could do this with any other form software, but we're going to keep it simple here and just use Tally Forms. The event that we choose is new response. We'll continue. If you haven't added your account in here, you'll have to go through and add that. And now select a form. That's going to be the form that you created. If you have multiple forms, there will be a list here, but for us, we just have this one for now. And then you'll test the trigger. So what it's going to do is it's going to find a recent response of a form that's already happened so that you know what the data looks like so that you'll be able to make use of it in the following steps. So we test the trigger and you'll see some information in here. So the form ID, form name, when it was created. This question 1 is going to be the photo that was uploaded. This is just a link to the raw photo. And then this question 2 is the email address that we provided. So we're going to want to basically capture the information in these 2 questions so that we can do the AI processing on the photo and then send the results to this email. So for now, that's all we need from Tally Forms. Let's continue. Step 2 is we need to now take that photo and send it over to one of the replicate models for processing. So next, let's take a look at these replicate models in more detail. Deoldify image here is a model that adds colors essentially to old images. So you can see an example that they have here of this famous photograph, and you can look at this API tab to see in more detail how you want to actually structure your API request to this model. So this is the most complicated part here, but it's not that complicated. So what they're showing here is Python code. We're not actually going to be using Python code, so you can read through this to get an example of the various things that we need to pass. We basically have to give them this field inputs, an input image, and then model name and render factor. Some of these are optional, but you have to kind of understand the structure of the data that you're wanting to send over there. But what we're actually going to be sending is just an API request, and it's going to be closest to this of all of these four options. It's not exactly curl, but this is kind of how you can see the information that you need to structure in the request. Now, if you don't, if this is all a little bit overwhelming, don't worry. You can find a lot of examples for how to set these things up online, but I have this all kind of pre-structured out for us, so we can just go ahead and get started. So we're going to go again back to this. This is step one. And again, we're going to select webhooks. And the event is going to be different here. So rather than catching hook, which was the trigger for the other options, we're going to be doing a custom request. The method here is post. We want to post some data over to Replicate. The URL, which is provided here is this api.replicate.com/v1/predictions. Data pass through, select false. And then data, this is kind of the most complex part. So we want to provide the version. The version is simply this value here. This refers to a specific model, specific version. So you can copy that directly from there. The webhook completed is going to be this URL from step 2. So webhook completed is essentially telling Replicate where to send the results of the API call to this model once it's complete. So you can put that in here, and one thing that I'm adding at the end is this is called a query string, and I just have question mark email equals, and for right now we are going to pass in that response from tally form email address. And the reason we need to do this is because we need to know what the email is where we want to actually send the results, but we're not going to have access to that once we get outside of this particular zap. So this zap retrieves the email that we want to send the results to. But when we move to the next zap, we're not going to be reading in that data from the tally form, and we need a way to know which particular Replicate API request is associated with which email where we want to send the results. And so the best way to do that is to just include the data with the webhook here, and then when we send the data over to Replicate, it's going to return this email back to us so that we can then use this in the next zaps and ultimately to send over our email. So that's version, that's webhook completed, and then we structure the input where we want to include the input image. So let's go into here, and that is this image file link. And the model name, I believe there were 2 model name options in here. There was artistic and stable, I think. Yeah, artistic and stable. You can play around with this, with like which ones you want to use. Stable, I think, generates possibly like fewer artifacts, but it says it's better for nature scenery. And so it really just depends what you're trying to build. I tested out both of them, and I thought that in general, artistic was giving me better results for the photos I was using. So I'm going to leave it at that. And this is the data. So that's essentially what we need here. The last thing we need in here is to put in our authorization so that Replicate knows who is actually sending this request and who, they're going to be billing for the request details. So when you sign up for Replicate, you're going to get an API token, and that API token is what you can use to create any of these Zapier requests that are going to be calling Replicate. That's how they associate it with you in particular. So you can see my API token here. Once I'm finished with these videos, I'll reset this so you can't, use my API token. You'll have to create your own. But that's essentially how that works. And you just want to structure it like I have here, headers authorization, and then token space, and then your token. So now we can continue. And if we test this action, okay, a request was sent about 2 seconds ago. Now if we come into Replicate and go to my dashboard, you can see that this just started 11 seconds ago. So it's currently in the starting stage, and eventually this will move to succeeded. And at that point, we'll be able to go into our step 2 and actually retrieve the results from this step 1. So if you click on the ID, you can see where you are in the process. We're still on starting. But let's see, we might not need to, we probably need to wait, but let's see if we can just go in here and test the trigger. Yeah, it says we couldn't find a request. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to wait here for just a minute while Replicate finishes. It basically, if you're using models that are very commonly used on Replicate, what you'll have is that these start processing almost immediately, and that's because everybody's using that model. But if you're using a model that is used a little bit more rarely, what Replicate will do is they'll turn those off in between uses, and so it'll need to start up the model like it says here, and it can sometimes take around 3 minutes while the model boots up. So while we wait for that, let's go into step 2 and we can start working on the next part of this request. So once we get that webhook result from the first model, we're going to need to send that back over to the second model. Now remember, I said this is optional. You could skip this step and just directly send the results to Gmail, but I thought it worked better if we included that. So we'll go into here, and we're going to include another webhooks action very similar to the one that we just set up. So choose event. Again, we're going to choose custom request. Method again is going to be, the URL is the same. So that's the replicate/v1/predictions. Data pass-through is again going to be false. And we're going to have a similar call here. The version is going to now match this version for the GFP GAN model. So that's this value here. And the webhook where we want to send the result is going to be our step 3 webhook URL. So we come back into here, copy it, and we're going to replace this. Again, see that we are still passing this email query string. That's going to be used to send the results to step 3 of our function here. And we'll have to replace that once we get the results from the API. And similarly, we'll have to replace this image. Unflatten is again yes, and then headers, that's going to be exactly the same as what you did for the last webhook. So authorization, and then token space, your replicate API key. Now let's go back to Replicate and see. Great, so this has finished. And so now if we come into here, I'm going to click continue just for now to save that. Now, if we come into catch hook and we test trigger, it should pull up what we just saw completed in Replicate. Perfect. We found her. So the information here, completed, created date, no error. This is the ID of the request. These are the inputs we sent. So it was artistic and that image that we uploaded to our tally form. These logs are just print statements that you don't need to worry about unless you're debugging some issues. Output, this is the output link to the colorized photo. If we open that up, you can see we have our colorized photo here, but it's not quite as high quality, high resolution as the final photo. So that's kind of the trade-off we're making with this extra complexity and this second step. And status succeeded. And finally, we have the query string, which includes the email that we sent in with the webhook address. So now we have both the email and the photo that we need to complete our next step. So coming back here into this second action step here, go back into setup action. Now we want to add the email here using this query string email value, and the image is going to be this output image here. Continue, and we'll test this action. Okay, and a request was sent to webhooks about a second ago. Again, now let's go back to Replicate. And you can see similarly here, now we have a call to this. No, there we go. Refresh. Okay, so this was created 17 seconds ago, and you can see it's already finished. So this was the input image. This is the output image. Now we need to find a way to actually email this output image result to the person who initially submitted the request. So we are basically done here with step 2 of this process. And so now we'll come into step 3. Let's test this trigger, which should retrieve that result that just completed. There we go. Looks very similar to the last one. So input image, output, we have this output image link, status succeeded. And again, we have this query string email. So we have everything we need. Now we just need to create the email that we're going to actually send the user with their completed image results. So let's go to continue. I'm going to just use Gmail here. You can use whatever email platform you want. The event is going to be send email. Continue. You'll choose your account. No, choose your account in here. Continue and set up action. So 2 is going to be this user that submitted the initial request on our tally form. And then from is going to be from your Gmail account. From name, you could put, whatever you want. So this could be your name. I'm just going to put the name of the tool. And for subject, I'm going to say something like your photo results are available. And for the body, you can say your photo results are available, and then provide a link to the final generated image that we just got from the second replicate step. So your enhanced photo is available. Please be sure to download this file as it will be removed in an hour. Okay, so if you're not familiar with HTML code, this is just the way to include a link using HTML. So what the email is going to look like is and then it's going to be a link that says enhanced Nostalgia AI photo is available, and then it's going to be no longer a link here. So the format is this href, and then in quotations you put the link that you want to link to. That's going to be this output file, and please be sure to download it, as it'll be removed in an hour. You don't need to do it this way. This is just, I think, looks a little bit better. If you want, you can just paste the raw link and that'll work as well. And we don't need to include anything else here, so we're going to continue and let's test this action. Awesome. And so now if I come into here, I just got this email and, oh, actually that didn't work. What did I mess up there? href equals, looks good, I don't know. But anyway, that could be figured out. So now we have this final link to the process, and that's the entire process. So basically what's going to happen now is you want to go back into here. We've tested everything, it looks good. You know, if you were developing this as like a full application, I would do a little bit more testing, but this is ready to go. So you want to make sure that you're publishing each of the zaps that we just created, and that's going to publish and turn these on. And now we have this entire process end to end that's going to, when somebody submits their results in the tally form, you know, basically send that to replicate step 1, that's going to run and complete, send it to replicate step 2, that's going to run and complete, and then the end result photo will be emailed back to the person who submitted the request. That is all we have to do here. So relatively straightforward to set up. And you could think about, you know, all kinds of possible extensions to this using different tools that are available on Replicate, different AI tools. But this is just to get you going with, you know, kind of an initial idea for how you might go about setting something like this up. You didn't have to do any coding. This is all very easy to set up in Zapier. And so, yeah, you know, I encourage you to kind of experiment with this. I'm going to share these templates so that you'll have access to these and don't need to create everything from scratch yourself. And yeah, feel free to edit, make your own creations, and I'd love to see what you have to share. Thanks.